Let me start with those verses that we want to, I think, kind of skip over most of the time because, to be honest, they bewilder us, right? The Lord said to Abraham, "Bring me a heifer 3 years old, a female goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon." Abraham brought God all these and cut them in two, laying each half over against the other. But he did not cut the birds in two. There it is, that thing again, ritual blood sacrifice. Now, 3 times the book of Genesis gives us an account of God making this covenant with Abraham and Sarah. This is the one that seals it, I guess, with a ritual blood sacrifice. A 3-year-old heifer, goat, and ram are cut in half. Gross, right? And then God's presence passes through the middle of those divided carcasses. What's that all about? Well, anthropologists tell us that it was actually common, a very specific kind of ritual sacrifice used to seal covenants in ancient cultures. In this kind of covenant, the parties involved would walk between the bits of the sacrificed animals, symbolically declaring, "May this happen to me if I break this covenant." In the typical structure of such agreements, the weaker party, such as a vassal king like Herod under Caesar, would be expected to pass between the pieces, committing themselves to obedience under the penalty of death. However, something extraordinary is different about this instance. In this story, only God, represented by the fire and smoke, passes between the pieces, not the weaker party. Abraham is not required to walk the path of blood because he's asleep, meaning that God takes full responsibility for this covenant. This twist on ritual blood sacrifice is radical. Instead of demanding fidelity from Abraham under threat, God unilaterally binds God's self to the promise, essentially declaring that God would rather suffer and die than break God's covenant. This passage is set within a world where gods were often capricious, contractual, transactional, requiring humans to offer sacrifices and loyalty in order to receive blessings. But the God of Abraham makes this promise without demanding reciprocity. Quid pro quo, as we hear a lot these days. And it's a shocking contrast to the conditional pacts of human rulers and deities. So we may grimace when coming upon passages like this in the Bible, with the ritual blood sacrifice on full display. But if we're open to learning the anthropology of it, it just might help us to discover how it is that the God of the Bible is so very different from the other gods. In fact, I'm willing to propose to you this morning that understanding the role of ritual blood sacrifice in the Bible, anthropologically, so to speak, is the key to understanding the entire Bible. I don't know if that's too bold of a claim. I guess it's why I put a little background on that anthropology that's helped me understand this better and really changed my life in drastic ways. I put that on the back of your sermon notes today. So here's how I would put the matter to you in a nutshell. This morning's account of the covenant with Abraham and Sarah in Genesis 15 ironically presents God sealing the covenant through ritual blood sacrifice in order to lead humankind on a journey away from those gods of sacrifice. Why did God need to make such a covenant? Sealed by this twist on ritual blood sacrifice, where God himself graciously takes full responsibility. Because human beings have already evolved with the experiences of God and sacrifice at the center of their lives and society. For many, many, many millennium up to that point. And that's never who the true Creator God has been. God created us in love and then watched, if you will, as we wandered down this wrong evolutionary path of ritual blood sacrifice and the gods who commanded it. We thought we knew who God is because these sacrifices do help to prevent even wider outbreaks of violence that can threaten our extinction. That's the evolutionary perspective, the anthropology of it, but we were wrong. Our evolution had us wandering down a false path away from the true God. In a couple weeks, we'll read Jesus' well-known parable of the prodigal son. I'd like to suggest reading it this morning as a parable of how God, like the father in the parable, watched his children go down the wrong paths and split apart. Even at the end of the parable, the older and younger son remained divided. We know that experience as parents, too, don't we? Watching our children make mistakes. We know what that's like. Especially ones that might have life-changing consequences. What do we do as parents when that happens? When our children are young, we sometimes impose some lesser consequences in order to teach them to what? To make some better choices. But as they become adults, we sometimes need to simply watch as they make wrong choices. It's really painful, right? But we can rely on what? Our covenants of love with them as parent and child. We can make it clear to them that we are always there with our love and support for the long haul, should they choose to return home. Now imagine that God, for tens of thousands of years, has watched our species wander down that wrong path. that does help us to initially avoid some even worse danger, but it's nevertheless a path with its own dangers in the end, because it believes in violence to stop the problem of violence. And a consequence of this dead-end path we took is because we failed to truly understand who our Creator is, who our Father is. For tens of thousands of years, we got it in our heads and our hearts that the gods require us to offer sacrifices in a quid pro quo arrangement. That's what the anthropology shows us across the globe. This ritual blood sacrifice for tens of thousands of years. That we must offer something precious to the gods, and then they will grant us favors in return, like rain for our crops, or victory over our enemies, or healing and protection from the diseases that plague us. If you are the true Creator God that has painfully watched your children wander down this wrong path, that doesn't understand that you are a God of grace, gift, love, not quid pro quo and punishment, what do? You make a covenant with them that's not based on quid pro quo, but instead on sheer grace. And you commit to the long haul of trying to slowly, gradually reveal to them who you truly are. That, my friends, is how I've come to read and understand the Bible. As this long journey of God making a covenant with the people of Israel in order to guide them on a new evolutionary path, if you will, away from the violent gods of sacrifice, in order to finally know the non-violent God of love. In short, to finally know the God of Jesus. That Jewish Messiah who suffered our typical human violence in order to expose it and to forgive it. The key to revealing who God truly is, in other words, it is to have revealed to us who we truly are. We're a species on an ultimately dead-end evolutionary path because we've come to believe in gods who command us to use violence as a solution to violence. But the true God has never abandoned us, remains in covenant with us. We've always been welcome to choose the path back home to the God of love. To the God whom Jesus shows us by taking on our sacrificial violence and then by being raised up in 3 days in order to forgive us. In order to begin leading us down a new evolutionary path that leads to abundant life. That's why I've come to emphasize that it's not about conversion to a new religion, especially since our religions have tended to lead us back to gods of violent sacrifice, to gods who command us to try to stop violence with violence. No, what we are offered in Jesus Christ is essentially conversion to a better way of being human. We're being offered a new evolutionary path that leads to endless life with the God of love. So here's how covenant goes along with that evolutionary view. The part of the story where we wander down false paths for tens of thousands of years help us to see why it takes a covenant with God to begin to undo those thousands of years. God knows it will take a long time for us to finally choose the path without any relapses. And sure enough, even those of us who have claimed Christ, we've made some of those lapses, haven't we? 16 centuries or so ago, when the church became allied with the empire, we began to mix those gods of violence once again with the God of love. And so God knows how long this is going to take, and God has made the covenant, the commitment to go on the journey with us. Let's end with the picture our gospel reading offers us today. Jesus is told that Herod is bearing down on him with what? The threat of typical human violence. If Jesus was to respond in kind, he might say something like, "Tell that fox Herod that he has a wolf waiting for him to dish it out as fiercely as he can." But no, Jesus chooses what? A mother hen instead of something like a wolf. "Go and tell that fox for me, listen, I'm casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finished my work. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often I have desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you weren't willing." In the face of Herod's threats, Jesus chose to be brave, to do humane work of liberating the enslaved and healing the sick, to be with others in covenantal love instead of withdrawing in fear. He insisted that God's kingdom, God's commonwealth, wouldn't arrive by surrendering to empire, to nationalism, but would come with the wing of a sacred embrace. God was not Pilate or Herod or Caesar. Those were agents of the devil. But God, the true God of Israel, is willing to suffer with and for us, the mother hen who refused to fear the fox, who refused to run away. And so that's our Lenten story this morning too. Another temptation, if you will, after reading the temptation stories last week. Another choice to choose the right path. Herod or hen? Unholy arms or sheltering wings? Jesus willingly surrendered to vulnerability. Will we? We are here this morning in that same covenantal love, even under the shadows of gathering sacrificial violence around us. And we're here to encourage one another to choose the path of love. Amen.